working through all the free video tutorials for the bernette b62, b64, and the b68 Serger and cover stitch machines. Hi, I'm Sarah from sewingmastery.com, where we do free video tutorials on many different brands of sewing machines, sergers, and embroidery machines. We have a complete playlist of all the bernette tutorials in the description below if you want to start binge watching them from the beginning. Next up, we're going to dive into stitch length, differential feed, cutting width, and the last knob over here, presser foot pressure. Depending on the fabric you've selected, how many layers you're going through, how thick the fabric is, and even which decorative threads you choose to use, these adjustments are going to be key for your success. So taking a few practice runs of what makes the difference when you adjust stitch length or differential feed, you'll start to recognize when you need to change from some of the default settings. We're currently threaded for a 4-thread overlock with just normal tension settings. If you haven't mastered threading this machine or using your needle threader, we're going to link a video right up here in this corner for starting your bernette serger journey. The Bernette Company has also included some handy workbooks that are free to download and follow along through these step-by-step instructions. You'll find links to those free workbooks also in the description below. I recommend to my own students to download, print off, and follow along as you learn hands-on techniques, stitches, and adjustments on your new bernette serger. If these videos have been helpful, it's customary to click the like button as you watch free video tutorials on YouTube. This helps us continue to make free content on future sewing machines, sergers, and embroidery machines. Let's start with stitch length. You'll notice that there is a dot between 2 and 3, which indicates a normal setting should you wonder where you should start with. So 2.5 millimeters of stitch length is similar to a default setting on your sewing machine. So if you think about how long a stitch length is, that's exactly what you're going to get for stitch length when you do a 4-thread overlock. If you're working on thicker fabrics and you leave it at that normal stitch length, those stitches are going to look much smaller, really teeny, even hard to take out. And the overlock stitches that go back and forth are going to look very close together, almost wasting thread when you're serging at a too close together stitch length. So for thicker fabrics, we're going to take the stitch length up to 3, maybe even a little bit higher, depending on how many layers you're stitching through. For something delicate or fine, reduce the stitch length to 2 or even close to 1. You'll find in our rolled hem video, to get a nice solid looking rolled hem, we'll be moving the stitch length all the way down to 1. I also really like that this knob is on the outside of the machine. They didn't always used to be this convenient. So you can actually do changes while you're stitching. So if it looks a little close together, just reach over here while you're sewing, lengthen the stitch length, and see the results before you even reach the end of the fabric. Later, when we work with decorative threads, they're a little chunky, so I'm always lengthening the stitch length to allow for the extra thickness from the decorative threads. Let's do this together. Take a piece of fabric, fold it in half, and start stitching at the longest stitch length. Starting at the length of 4, stitch down a couple inches, then adjust it to 3, 2, and 1. As you saw, the stitch length at 4 traveled down the fabric very quickly. I would use the stitch length of 4 when I'm doing techniques like gathering or using the gathering foot that is optional for this machine. You'll see down here where we're kind of in the middle stitch length, those look like normal sewing machine stitches. And to tell you the truth, on a 4-thread overlock, a stitch length of 1 is a little messy. We don't usually use that close together stitch length when using all 4 threads. If you haven't tried adjusting your stitch length while you're serging, give it a try next time you sit down to serge. The next thing I want you to master is cutting width. This knob here is going to adjust the knife closer to the needles or further out. To see it in action, open up the front door and look at the knob and look at the knife right next to your foot. As you move it to a smaller number, you're going to notice that the knife moves in towards the needle. So that means that it's actually cutting off more fabric. I'm going to show you what it looks like in action in a second. As you turn it to a higher number, you're going to notice the knife getting much further away from the needles. That is going to leave a lot more fabric squished in to that overlock stitching. Now, since your serger doesn't know what thickness of fabric you're working on, your manual or your stitch chart is always going to recommend just the normal middle setting, where the dot is pointing to the top of the serger. Again, this is another thing that you can change while you're stitching and see the results immediately. To really give you a quick view of this, I'm going to start by moving the knife all the way away from the needles as possible. That's the highest number on the dial. To give you something to compare to, let's go ahead and take the dial all the way to the smallest number. You saw the knife move towards the needle, and I'm going to just stitch down a second side. On the first side, with the knife furthest away from the needles, you see how much fabric is left in between here compared to the second time I stitched. You can even see that there's a slight curve or cup of the fabric because there's too much fabric being kind of jammed in to this distance from the needles to the outside of the loopers, making the fabric not want to lay flat when you run your fingers across it. I can kind of feel a ridge inside. On the flip side, with a 4th thread, this actually doesn't look bad at all, but what you do sometimes see is when you have a 3-thread overlock stitch and you see those loops hanging off the edge of your fabric, that means that there's not enough fabric to fill it in. So you're looking for that happy middle of where the blade actually needs to sit. So it's not so much stitch width that we're getting with this adjustment, but how much fabric is left to be inside the overlock stitch. Now, this is a sample from our rolled hem video, and I didn't point it out at that point, but we were doing the different adjustments and changing it as I went. But I'm noticing, like right here, can you see where the stitches aren't super even and there's kind of this like bulge of white fabric? What's happening is even though this is set for a perfect rolled hem, there's actually too much fabric being left inside to kind of curl. So it starts to spread out the stitches. So if your stitches are ever not super even as they should be, it's usually the fact that you have too much fabric inside. So take your cutting width to a smaller number, cut a little bit more off, and you'll see the stitches be more even. But on the flip side, I often have people who do rolled hems on very sheer fabric, think prom dresses or bridesmaids dresses, and as they're stitching, the rolled hem actually stops connecting with the fabric. It actually falls off, and it's usually like this little chain, and then it catches the fabric again, and you actually just have to re-stitch it. That is a result of not having enough fabric caught in the rolled hem for the stitch to kind of latch onto or grasp the edge. So by going the opposite way on something really, really sheer, make the knife a little bit wider so it's not cutting off the fabric so close to where the stitching line is. I have to say, this is one part that is a little harder for students to grasp, so give yourself grace. Try a wide, middle, and narrow version as you're doing your test on some new fabric that you've never stitched on before. Let's talk differential feed. Again, this is another one you don't need very often, maybe 1 out of 10 times. You will find yourself needing to adjust the differential feed. So normal is set at 1. You'll notice this knob goes down to a 0.6 and it goes all the way up to 1.5 and tops off at 2. So let me explain what this actually is and the best way to remember which way to change it if you need to engage the differential feed. The most common use of differential feed is when you start to work on knit fabrics. Without changing anything, so everything's at the default setting, I'm going to just stitch down a piece of knit fabric. Very stretchy. This is actually a really nice knit. It's very buttery, but when you stitch it and then lay it back flat, you are noticing that it kind of got stretched out. It's starting to wave or flute. Sometimes on some fabrics, it will actually kind of look like it's smiling because it's stretched and curving itself. So what's happening is, on a serger, if you bring up your needles and lift up your presser foot and look underneath, you're going to notice that there are 2 sets of feed dogs. There's 2 in the front and 2 in the back. So think of them as normal, at the normal setting. Both of them are pulling the fabric in together at the same rate. But compared to a sewing machine foot, a serger foot is this long. So there's a lot more pressure on more fabric, especially when it's stretchy, to have that fabric stretched out before it actually gets stitched. So differential feed is the adjustment of feed dogs. Now, again, here's the trick. If you don't remember which way to turn it when you realize, oh no, my fabric is coming out wavy, which way did she say to turn it? If you just turn it one way, it's going to get worse or it's going to get better. So if it gets worse, well, now you know to turn it the opposite way. So honestly, you have a 50-50 shot. But what we're going to do is we're going to turn it towards the 2.0 setting. For this, I would probably be about 1.5. I will change it and show you the difference. But what's going to happen is the front feed dog is going to reach forward 1.5 times compared to the one behind it that will stay at 1. Okay, so by easing it in, that's going to bring more fabric, keep it underneath the foot, not get it spread out. And then as it comes down to stitch, it's more eased in instead of out. See how much flatter that is? If you got a better result, but maybe not all the way, go ahead and turn it a little bit more towards 2. And again, depending on how much wave you have in your fabric will depend if you're between 1.5 or 2, which is the max setting. Now, if you are wanting it to wave or gather, that is when we actually turn the differential feed up to 2 on purpose. So if you just want to gather fabric, a single layer, you can tighten your needle tensions and send your differential feed up to 2.0 and run your fabric through, and it will just gather it up for you. We're talking lighter weight fabrics. We're not talking home deck fabrics. Those I would save to use with my ruffler on my sewing machine. But a serger will do a lot of normal weight fabrics, especially knits, and give you a wonderful gathered look. So on the flip side, if your fabric is gathering, okay, so usually something more in the satin or sheer rayon, when you run it underneath the serger, sometimes one layer wants to gather up a little bit. Well, that's when we use the differential feed in the opposite direction of what we did for the knits. So instead of it being at 1, we're going to take it down closer to the 0.6. So that's where that front feed dog, instead of going and getting more, it's actually going to get less while this one's doing the rest of the work. So it is a happy medium, finding which one is normal. I've also gone to the store, bought fabric that I thought, oh my gosh, this is stretchy, it's going to need differential feed. I've run it through the serger, no problem whatsoever, comes out perfectly flat, no adjustments needed. You don't even have to deal with adjusting the differential feed. That's why I said kind of 1 in 10, because not every fabric is going to be troublesome. Now the last dial that you have over here, and there's a picture for pressure of how firm this foot is sitting on the fabric. I will tell you, I rarely adjust this, but there's a time and place I've needed to. There's a high or a more pressure, usually done with something that's really thick. You might want more pressure to hold all the layers together as it's going through. Sometimes for the lightweight knits, okay, a lighter pressure would make it so the foot isn't kind of stretching it out. This can actually be used in conjunction when you're getting those wavy stitches. Is adjusted to a less, so it almost is like a hovercraft. It's like skimming along it instead of pressing down and stretching it out. But just remember that kind of that dot in the middle is the normal setting. So start there just to see if you need any adjustment at all before you get started. Again, the workbooks that are free to download, which we have links in the description below, will be super helpful for you to take notes, or even put some of these little samples that you're testing out and doing, maybe put them in some sheet protectors and keep them for reference for later. Remember to click like if you've reached the end of this video as your way of saying thank you for the free information. Happy serging!